Hi, I'm Nil Zacharias, the founder of Eat for the Planet. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive session today about how to enrich your lifestyle with a climate conscious diet. So let's start off by addressing the elephant in the room. We were all supposed to be in DC today in the same room doing this as a panel discussion, but here we are, obviously not in DC, but sitting in our own homes because of the global pandemic right now. So it's obvious that this pandemic has impacted all our lives, but one of the things we can, I guess, sort of be thankful for in this time is that thanks to the pandemic and the situation that we find ourselves in, issues like health, nutrition, immunity, as well as the importance of having a resilient food system are now more important than ever before, and are issues that everyone seems to be concerned about right now. And while on the surface, it may seem like the COVID-19 crisis has absolutely nothing to do with the climate crisis, if you dig deeper and look at the roots of both these emergencies, you'll find that it's connected to one system, and that is our global economy and our global society. And this is putting it really nicely. Our global society is out of sync with the natural world. So that's kind of where we find ourselves. And even if you don't see the connections so clearly, or you're not ready to see the connections, at least we can all agree that this crisis is a bit of a warning for a much bigger crisis that's looming on the horizon. And that is the climate crisis, specifically how food production is going to impact the climate crisis. And I say that because if we don't reform our food system by the year 2050, when we have 10 billion people on the planet, there's no way we can feed the world in a sustainable way. So why is food production such an important issue? So food production is obviously very taxing on the environment, and animal agriculture specifically, or factory farming, is the biggest offender. So why is that the biggest offender? Because livestock production, industrial livestock production specifically, contributes more greenhouse gases than all of transportation combined. It uses up a majority of our freshwater resources, occupies about half of the world's arable land, and it contributes to air, water pollution, land degradation, deforestation, and is also driving millions of species to the brink of extinction. And the worst part about all of this is that it doesn't even really do a very good job at feeding the world. Nearly 1 billion people around the world suffer from food scarcity. So in a nutshell, factory farming is killing the planet. And if you peel the layers of this onion, you will find that the food that it produces is actually killing us. So we're not here to talk so much about the problem, but really about what the solution is to this problem. And I've got an amazing group of panelists with me here today to help me do just that. So I'm going to introduce them now. We have Sillian Semaan, the Director of Food and Environment at the Earth Day Network. We have Haile Thomas, a wellness and compassion activist and the founder and CEO of the Happy Org. Dotsie Bausch, Olympic medalist, world champion cyclist, and founder of Switch for Good. And Miss Montana 2020, Merissa Underwood. So thank you everyone for joining us. Just a quick note, we're gonna leave some room towards the end of this discussion for some of your questions. So that is the listener questions or the viewer questions. So if you have questions, put it into the Q&A box and we will address them towards the last 15 minutes of our discussion today. So Sillian, let's get started with you. So it has been estimated that the average American citizen needs to consume 90% less pork, 75% less beef, 60% less cow's milk, and 50% less eggs if we are to avoid a climate catastrophe. Can you tell us a little bit more, why is it that animal agriculture is so bad for the environment and has such a negative impact on our natural resources?
Yes, thank you, Nil, and thank you, panelists and everyone for being here today. So we never really make the connection between climate change and what we're eating. But Nil, as you mentioned, animal agriculture is one of the largest contributors to climate change. It's the leading cause of deforestation, air and land pollution, and biodiversity loss. I just want to put something into perspective for folks. We raise about 70 billion animals annually for human consumption. 16% of global freshwater resources are devoted to strictly livestock, and a third of our grain production is for livestock as well. So the way that we're growing food, producing food, consuming food, and wasting is a planetary nightmare. It is not sustainable for us. So when we want to make the connection between what we're eating and climate, think about all of our infinite resources that we have available. We have to think about water and land pollution. An amazing stat is that global livestock production produces 7 to 9 times more sewage than humans. And if you think about it, that's disgusting. The amount of pesticides and antibiotics and heavy metals that are in the water is ludicrous. But when we think about our food and what we're eating or the steak that's on our plate, we don't think about the infinite resources that, to be honest, some communities lack as it is. So what I would like to get out of this conversation is, really making sure that we make that connection, but also the how to do it is what a lot of people are really interested in. So I'm excited to talk about that today.
Yeah, I'm so glad you mentioned just the waste that is produced from the livestock system. Just keep in mind that we are 7.5 billion people on the planet today, but at any given time, there's about 20 billion farm animals alive. And we all produce waste, and so do they. As Jillian pointed out, farm animals in the US alone produce about 365 million tons of feces every year. That's enough to fill the Empire State Building every day of the year for the entire year. So that's a lot of poop, obviously. And that's just one of the many negative impacts of this system. So obviously, it brings up the question, if animal agriculture is so destructive, and if factory farming or industrial animal agriculture, which is where we get about 99% of our meat, dairy, and eggs in this country, what is the solution? And so let's start addressing that. So Dotsie, plant-based food has been often touted as one of the answers to the climate crisis, and that if we are able to shift our diets in that direction, we can make a significant positive impact on the environment. Just to give you some stats to kick things off, if you just eat plant-based for one day, that's just one day, you can save about 1,500 gallons of water, 45 pounds of grain, 30 square feet of land, and about 20 pounds of carbon dioxide. So you can have a tremendous impact just by doing it for one day. But in these trying times, with everyone concerned about the pandemic and staying at home and their health and immunity, maybe planetary concerns are not the biggest issue that everyone is focused upon. And they're focused upon health and nutrition, rightfully so. So from your experience, Dotsie, you've obviously thrived eating plants. What have you learned, or what can you tell people about the health benefits of choosing more plants in your diet?
Sure. Well, now that we have thoroughly grossed everyone out, you guys did a wonderful job. We'll dive into the food, right? And the health benefits, like you said, because it's kind of on the top of everyone's mind right now, health and wellness and how to boost our immunity and stay healthy through this pandemic. And then of course, for many years after. The list is almost literally endless. There's so many benefits. You can, by trading out animal foods, some of the animal foods on your plate, I always say it's all or something, right? It's not all or nothing. So, think baby steps if you need to, but if you trade out some of the animal foods on your plate for plant-based foods, both research and thousands of anecdotal stories tell us that you'll have stronger bones. You're less likely to get ovarian cancer. In fact, eating 3 or more servings of vegetables per day can decrease your ovarian cancer risk by 39%. You're less likely to get heart disease, type 2 diabetes, which are, our top 2 killers in the States anyway. And then the inflammation in your body will go down, meaning you'll feel more fluid, you'll have less joint pain if you suffer from that, and you'll recover better, which was really the key for me as an Olympic athlete, to be able to recover and repair faster after workouts and in between workouts. But it's even important now, just, in my everyday life. Other things you can also experience are better breathing. If you suffer from maybe waking up with a stuffy nose or have a lagging cough or slight wheezing, you may very likely be suffering from lactose intolerance, right? Which is lactose is from cow's milk. 65% of the world's population actually is, and the percentages are even higher in people of color. Other symptoms of dairy intolerance include stomach bloating and cramping, even itchy skin conditions. So you will likely feel like $1 million if you're intolerant to dairy and you end up giving it up. So I could go on and on and on, but it's just, it's a real energy booster. Most of the athletes that I've talked to that have switched over to a plant-based diet during their career, that's the number one thing they say. They say, I just could not even imagine that this explosion of energy would happen. And then of course their recovery improved, but we're just really always fighting that energy lag as athletes, because you're training so hard and you're training multiple times a day. So being able to bounce out of bed the next morning is important as an athlete, and then it's important to all of us just in our busy everyday lives.
Thanks, Dotsie. And I think it's so important that you mentioned that it's not all or nothing, and that baby steps can go a long way. Most people are afraid to take a giant leap and change the way they're eating. But you can start with one meal, and that's just a simple, sort of easy way for people to make their way towards eating this way. Just a quick note for those that are watching this live: if you want to ask questions, you can do so in the Q&A. Put your question in there. Also include your name and where you are from, so we can get a better sense of where the question's coming from. So Haile, let's get you involved in this discussion now. So Dotsie's obviously laid out just some amongst many of the health benefits of choosing plants, or at least shifting your diet towards more plants. But one of the concerns that people tend to have is that they find it really hard to give up their comfort foods and familiar flavors. And I don't know if this is a misconception, a myth or not, but some people feel that, when you're eating plants, will it really be satisfying? And will eating plants really mean taking away all the joy of eating? So we don't want that, do we? So Haile, tell us why eating plants can be just as flavorful and exciting and fun as anything else you're used to eating.
Absolutely. Well, to debunk that myth, plant foods are definitely, they don't have to be unenjoyable and bland. And I think any food, does not have to be that way. But I think we have to think about how food really transcends its necessity. Of course, we need food to survive and to have energy and to function, but it also is deeply rooted and connected to so much more in our lives. It's our heritage, our culture, whether, from our personal background or our community culture. It's also the place where we can express our creativity and connect with others. And I think especially during this time, when you're discovering A, how essential community is, and B, that it transcends, any normal structures, we're still able to commune, and it's been really important and valuable for us to do so. So I think that when we're thinking about food, and specifically plant-based foods, it's important to bring in all of those aspects. Yes, you can integrate all of the flavors and seasonings from your culture and make your own comfort foods. And it really just takes a little bit of, adventure mentality and just being able to explore and get creative and try new things. And so being open-minded is such an essential piece of this. And to go on that journey is so important. I come from a Jamaican family, and clearly, like in our culture, it's not 100% plant-based, and even parts of the culture, plant-based is a huge focus as well. And so it's just finding ways to bring in those things that you love and find community to go on this journey with. And even while we're staying at home, we can do so. And we've been seeing that through, cooking classes on live and FaceTime and all of those fun things. And so I think if we're able to just tap into that and the abundance of plant-based foods and the ingredients and spices that we can use, we're really able to find a certain joy that is necessary for us to do this work. And when we're transforming our health and wellness and also thinking of the long-term impact of, that on our own personal health and the planet, I think it's important to infuse joy into that journey. And so we can do that by changing our mindset and the way we approach it, and by bringing in our community. And I think that's a really special, beautiful thing that can happen and just make this whole situation less daunting and scary, and just a journey that we can enter with, some lightness and fun.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's so important that you mentioned is the mindset shift, right? It seems like it seems so complicated until you actually try it, and then you realize that you actually end up discovering more food than you even knew existed, and you actually find food becomes more fun rather than less fun. So there's so much we can tackle there. We'll come back to that, Haile, for sure. But Merissa, I want to get your thoughts on some of this as well, because you come from the great and beautiful state of Montana. And I've been to Montana. The state has a lot of cattle ranchers and a lot of people who are really proud about the fact that they eat meat. Yet you've been very vocal about your commitment to a plant-based diet. So can you tell us a little bit more about why eating this way is important to you, firstly? And then secondly, how do you convince someone who is a diehard meat eater to at least cut down their consumption of meat? What are the things that you typically tell them?
So for the first, it's so important to me. First, I'm an animal rights activist. So I look at it as the health and the well-being of animals as well as ourselves, but I put the animal aspect of it first. So a little backstory on me. I was in Future Farmers of America in high school and also a competitive horseback rider for 15 years. So I had one side where I treated my horse better than even myself. These horses are elite athletes in our eyes. We treated them so well. And then I would go to school, and in my FFA class, we would learn about chickens and pigs and cows and why we eat them. And at the end of the year in FFA, you would go to county fair and you would sell your animal if you chose to. And that concept to me was so foreign, and I couldn't understand it, how you would create a bond with another living being and then sell it. And so I think it's really important for us spiritually as humans to look at animals as equals, not in the terms of like, we should let them overrun the world and they're literally equal to us, but they are just as much deserving of their lives and their happiness as we are. And so I think it's just really incredible that being vegan allows you to extend comfort to yourself, to the planet, and to animals. And it's this concept of intersectionality where you're covering ground to create so much peace, because I really do believe that what you put into your body is a reflection of your body. And if you're putting in, so these animals die in such a terrifying, traumatic way, you're taking their energy and putting it in your body. And then that energy is released into the world. So when you're eating well-nourished foods that come from love, I really believe that it exudes who you are. And then into crossover, being in a state that has more cattle than it has people, it's challenging because a way of life for anybody is challenging. And so for me, being able to talk to somebody who's newly interested in being plant-based, I'll say do it in steps. I don't believe, just like Dotsie said, do it in steps. Don't try to tackle it all at once, because as a society, we've been trained to commodify animals in every way possible. And that could be, so you look at it at an ingredient list, and you'll see milk powder at the very end. Why is there milk powder at the very end of an ingredient list, right? So animals are treated in commodities in every single way. So do one thing for 30 days and then another thing for 30 days. If you're deciding to cut something completely, like for me, I did dairy first. I wanted to see if it would help my skin. I did dairy, then I did red meat, yada, yada, yada. So looking at it as one little goal at a time.
Thank you, Merissa. That's so insightful. Thanks. And I love that you brought it back to how do we get started, because I think that seems to be the biggest question for those who are watching this today. I'd love to dive into everyone's backstory too, but we'll see if you have time for that. But let's maybe pivot to a few practical tips that we can share with people to get started on their journey, because it always seems like the first step is the hardest one after all. So Dotsie, what would you tell people are the first things they can do to start eating more plant-based? What are some simple tips that you can share with them?
Well, I think number one is maybe to find your why. We've talked about all three whys actually on the panel so far, right? We started out with the environment, and you and Jillian drove that one home. So that right there is like, okay, you know, if you're a fan of planet Earth, then this may be something you want to consider. And Merissa did a beautiful job, obviously, with the animals, and we have our health to consider. It's you know, our top two killers are killing over 600,000 of us in America alone. And so if we're going to lean into plants, if we say, okay, I think I've got my why, and your why could be all three, or it could be a couple or just one, but really find that reason so that those first couple steps that you take, that first week, that first month, you feel empowered, right? When it gets hard, you can go back to your why. And like we've mentioned, it's important to take it one step at a time. So maybe for you, that's one day a week, or maybe that's one meal a day, right? Don't hyper focus on making it perfect, right? Don't have that perfectionistic kind of idealistic approach to it like we do so often with a lot of things that we start. Really, it's a lifestyle. It's not a diet. So if you're going to create a lifestyle, you want to take it slow. And I think also we need to remember that when we're starting what we think is going to be and maybe a whole new lifestyle that we're going to turn over, to get excited about it, right? Look, kind of approach it with some joy and some anticipation at all of the amazing variety of colorful foods and spices like Haile mentioned, and flavors that are going to turn on our taste buds. Enjoy the journey. If you mess up, whatever even that means, no worries, no worries. Just keep going, right? Keep exploring, keep enjoying, keep going to the grocery store and all the different amazing plant-based restaurants around and try new things, figure out what you like. And one thing that's really important, and I always say to people, if you run into a plant-based food that you don't like, don't get it anymore. I get that all the time, like, oh, I was really enjoying it, but then I tried XYZ and I don't like that. It's like, don't eat that then, right? That happens in the animal food-based world. So, you know, just kind of kick it behind you and move on. Just have fun exploring, I think is the point there. Yeah.
Thanks, Dotsie. I mean, approaching it with enthusiasm is everything. And I think if everyone could bring Dotsie to get that conversation started, her enthusiasm will I think, propel anyone to try plant-based food. So, Merissa, I want to get your insights on this as well. What tips would you share? And essentially, we're trying to help people understand that plants can be moved to the center of the plate. The center of the plate doesn't always have to be meat. So what do you typically tell people as the first step that they can take? It's a question for Merissa.
My computer froze when you were asking that, so I just assumed it wasn't me. So you said the first step to
bring plants to the center of the plate. What do you typically tell people they should do to get started?
So first thing I usually ask people is, what is your favorite food? And then try and figure out what the swap is. So for me, I was a big meat eater. Like, I have a lot of friends who are vegan who say, oh, meat disgusts me. I just had to stop eating it. I loved meat. I loved bacon, ribs, etc. So for me, I found foods that gave me a similar taste to that. I'm a huge fan of mushrooms. I love jackfruit. That gives me that like pulled pork type of thing, really hearty foods. Because what people say to me a lot is they're still hungry, or they don't only want to eat salads. And you can make these huge like grain bowls, you know, fill them with grains and potatoes, things that will really fill you up. Because what I notice, it's when people are hungry that they cave. So if you're eating these really fibrous, rich foods, you won't cave because you'll be full and you'll feel really good. And what I love the most about it is that, so in pageants, people say all the time, oh, what food do you miss the most? How's your diet going? How are you staying Miss USA ready? You know, what are you eliminating? Nothing. I don't eliminate anything. I don't diet. I will eat what I want when I want. I just always consistently eat really high quality foods. So finding foods that you really loved before you wanted to be plant-based is the first step. So then it feels really natural and normal. And in my eyes, it's not restrictive. You're not removing anything necessarily. You're simply taking what was never yours in the first place and just taking food from the ground that was meant for us.
Yeah, that's so impactful. Haile, from your perspective, if you can get even more practical right now, everyone's stuck at home. If they're watching this right now, if they themselves haven't been trying to eat plant-based or want to convince someone else maybe in their family to do so, what could you share some simple cooking hacks or tips that people can try at home that will surprise them?
Yeah, for sure. It's interesting. I think that it's so important for us to take, all of this that we hear here today, and really internalize kind of what rings true for us. I think that it's important to look at this advice and see what resonates, because for me, I went plant-based overnight. I had to do it entirely, and that's just my personality. Like, I have to go 100%. And so for those of you who also are like that, like, it's okay to also jump full into it. And I think that it's important to look at everything we're saying and think what aspects really resonate with us. So there's no right way to do this. It's just really being open to the journey unfolding in any way. And when I first jumped into it, I'd like made it a whole challenge for myself, and that's just how it works for me, to have these kind of milestones of, oh, I made it a month doing it 100% and yada yada. And so it just kind of unfolded that way. But I think that in terms of really diving in and being invested in terms of the cooking and food perspective, it's really important to, as Dotsie said, have that why and that intention behind it. And when we do that, my first step wasn't in the kitchen. It was actually in on my couch and watching Netflix and watching all of those documentaries. Game Changers is an incredible one that really touches on all of those aspects of plant-based eating in the environment, your health, animal agriculture. And so having that as that foundation was really helpful, and including my family and my friends in those discussions and dialogues makes it a really supportive environment to jump in. So from that standpoint, then I feel equipped to really jump into the kitchen and start getting creative. And so some of my favorite ways to really make things exciting when we're cooking in the kitchen with plant-based foods is, one, to cook from the seasons and really be inspired by that. Nature brings us this incredible abundance and variety of fruits and vegetables and nuts and seeds and all of these things, and it's really amazing experience to eat with the seasons. You just feel so much more connected with Mother Earth and the cycles and all of these things. And so when you're doing that, not only do you just switch up what's normally on your plate, but you're really reaping all those benefits from something that's in season and wasn't frozen or shipped in from somewhere else. You're able to eat more locally and more fresh foods, and that's amazing, and you definitely reap those benefits. Another great thing is to get to know your seasonings and not be afraid of mixing things up and doing your own types of fusion. In my nonprofit, we teach plant-based nutrition education to young people, and one of my favorite things ever is during our summer camps to see kids like doing fusion that I literally could never imagine in my life. Like, we're seeing, Mexican spices and Indian inspired spices, and like, it's insane the combinations that we see. We've got Italian seasonings in there as well, and it's like not even about what's right, it's just what tastes good, what's vibrant, what's fun and exciting and different. And I think that kind of tapping into that childlike, whatever happens mindset, I think is really fun and can just bring some liveliness to the whole experience. And if you're really looking to find and bring balance to those foods, you can definitely tap into like umami ingredients like tamari or nutritional yeast and miso paste. All of those things bring a nice savory and deep rich flavor to plant-based foods, so those are great to add in when you're preparing things.
Thank you, Haile. I also think that it's important for people to understand that while we all may be initially driven to try to eat this way because we care about the environment, or those facts that Jillian and I shared in the beginning have really scared you, or because you're concerned about your health, or because you have a passion for animals, these three issues, which may seem separate on the surface, are also interconnected. And even when it comes to the environment, which may seem like, you have to be a tree hugger to really be an environmentalist, the environment is so intrinsically tied into our own health and the future of food security around the world, as well as making sure we have healthy populations. So if you care about people, you should care about the food that you're eating. And of course, if you care about animals and the environment, this is an issue that should concern you. One of the things I wanted to also bring up was, as I hear all of you share some of your insights on how people can get started, what role did community play for each one of you? And anyone feel free to chime in on this one, that drove you to make eating plant-based easier, or just continues to make it more fun for you. Haile, you mentioned at the beginning, community is such an important part of everything, especially in these trying times. How has community helped you eat plant-based and continue to do that for the last several years? It's for anyone, really.
Okay, so I could take it, but I don't want to sound negative, because everybody's journey is going to look different. My journey looked very different. I was forced into it, to be quite honest. I was in a hospital, and I had to make really hard changes in my life. I was also working for the Department of Agriculture at the time, where I've seen a lot of farms. So for me, being forced into a situation, coming from a Middle Eastern background where no one in my family, a very large family, is plant-based or vegan, or, grew up, I grew up on lamb and on meat. So it was, to be honest, foreign to us, foreign to my family and to me. So I didn't really have a supportive community. I had a family who wanted me to feel better. But in terms of community, I had to find it. I really had to find it within myself, to go into different places and say, I'm trying to do this for the betterment of my health and the planet, and now seeing the suffrage of animals. How can I make this a part of my life that is really sustainable? Because I knew it wasn't going to be just for that month of me getting out of a hospital. It was going to be a lifetime for me. And 7 years later, I now have the most supportive family who, it's amazing to see, because now I go to my parents' house, there's no cow's milk in their house. It's either oat or almond. But I think it's really important to have these conversations. And incremental change is so important. But also realize that everyone's journey is going to be different. And that's what we have to remember. I did it overnight, Haile did it overnight, but it's not going to happen that way for many people. But community is definitely very important, and just don't give up. If it's something that's so meaningful to you, whether it's for your health, the environment, animals, you'll find a way to make it happen.
I'd love to jump in next on that. So for me, the community has been the most powerful aspect of it, and especially the animal rights community are some of the most passionate, loving, connected people that I have ever experienced. And especially for me, my experience being Miss Montana and an animal rights activist has come with a lot of negative side. And then when my animal rights community found out what was happening with the negativity, they came in with such support I had never anticipated, and am so thankful for. And the community is so amazing, whether it's in person, like I'll see somebody with a vegan tattoo or a vegan t-shirt, or I'll just see them buying something that's vegan, and I'll be like, are you vegan? And they're like, yeah. And immediately we're friends. Like, so many of my friends I've made on this simple basis, I see one thing that hints that they're vegan, and it's like, oh, we've clicked. Especially the social media community. I think I'm in like 7 vegan Facebook groups, maybe 8. And the internet can get crazy, but overall, they're so supportive and so passionate and kind. And so when you tell somebody, hey, I'm trying this for the first time, for me, there is no better feeling than when a friend texts me at the grocery store and says, what do I buy? Or I open up the refrigerator at their house and I see oat milk for the first time. No better feeling. So there's something really, really special about people who are so connected in terms of just something as simple as what we eat, even though it's actually not simple.
Thank you, Merissa. Dotsie, do you have any thoughts on community? I know you've had a long and interesting journey to a plant-based diet, and now it's starting a nonprofit and using your background as well as your success to further this important message. So what have you learned and gathered over the years?
I agree with Merissa, where it's just it's like a clan, right? And you can meet a stranger in an airport and you're hugging because you just feel that like heart-centered connection. I personally did it a little bit in a silo. I was a couple of years out from Olympic Games, and my husband took the journey with me, which, wow, that was awesome, and very lucky for that. But now the community is growing amongst athletes who are doing it for performance, right? So I feel like we're starting to enter an age where there's a fourth entry point into this movement, right? And that's performance. That's peak premium athletic output performance. And I tell you what, a plant-based diet will give you that edge if you haven't tried it as an athlete. So the community around that is just, it's robust. It's really developed in just even the last, I would say, 12 to 24 months. And I am enjoying, as similar to Merissa, again, just holding people's hands, because I'm almost 10 years in now. And so I just love getting the texts, the emails, you just cheering them on. They're feeling better, but they run into a glitch, or they're curious about some kind of food, or, oh, I want to have Mexican tonight. Like, what's the best plant-based meat to spice up and put on there? Just that whole journey is so fulfilling, because it's not just me anymore, kind of in my silo, the way I switched over. So, yeah.
Thanks, Dotsie. Haile, anything to add there? I'll move to the next question if not.
Yeah, I think I would just briefly like to add that we kind of have to remember that this entire situation that we're facing with the climate and with animal agriculture is based off of exploitation. And, there are also individuals who are not able to have the privilege of being in this conversation and are also exploited by, the environmental damage that's going on and by animal agriculture, both internally and externally in their communities. And so I think that, it's really great to build community of like-minded individuals and to be able to celebrate that. But we also have to step outside of our bubbles and make this conversation inclusive. I'm sure, even to consider, fighting for the planet versus fighting to pay your bills or making sure that you have a roof over your head, is a privilege for sure. And so I think the more that we allow ourselves to connect with others on a level that is just human, like beyond the lifestyles and the labels that we put onto ourselves, how can we just reach out, not reach down or whatever, but just reach out and open the door to learn about this, make this information accessible. And I think doing online seminars, that is making it even more accessible. And so even though we're in this time of staying at home, maybe this message is able to reach more because of that. And I think that if we are able to break down those systemic barriers that prevent many populations, specifically populations of color, to access the things that they need to thrive and to be nourished, and all of these things that we can freely explore and consider even adopting, is really important, and something that we can't let go unnoticed in these conversations. Is just that this is interconnected, as we've all mentioned. It's a 360 effect, and we have to think of those who we believe we can't relate to on the surface, but in reality, I think we all have this innate want to be purposeful in our everyday actions, and we want to be connected and to support others, but we need to bridge that gap of those who have the privilege to do so and those who may not, but still have that innate desire to.
Haile, you bring up such an important point that a lot of people get started with this way of eating or try to incorporate more plants in their diet, either because they are forced to because of their own health or because they care. They care about the planet, they care about future generations, and they care about animals. And so it's built on this ethic of compassion. And at the same time, what ends up happening is we end up falling into these bubbles and these micro communities that only talk to other people who look and act the same as you and have the same amount of money as you. And so I think you bring up this important point that it's crucial for us to extend that ethic of compassion or that empathy to people beyond our own immediate circles. And while it's important to have a support system that's similar to us, it's important to understand how we can break down some of those barriers, because if this was as simple as, you know, everyone wakes up tomorrow and can make a choice, it is for some people, and we're privileged if we fall into that category. But for many people, even if they want to make a choice like this and they want to eat healthy, they don't have a grocery store near them or can't access fresh produce, or, you know, that cheap fast food burger is way more accessible and affordable than anything in the produce aisle or even some of the plant-based options that are available. And it's only because the system is set up the way it is. But I think it's important for us to be aware of it so we are able to see those restrictions that may prevent people from making the same choices that we find so easy to make. But I think that's a very crucial point that you bring up. I'm going to pivot slightly to something less serious. I want to get everyone's take on, especially since we're all at home and we're probably experimenting with baking, or maybe not, or maybe trying to cook new things or mess up in the kitchen. What is each one of yours favorite plant-based meal to eat at home? Because that's the only way you're eating right now.
Okay, I guess I'll go first. So, you know, growing up Middle Eastern, we've had curry. Curry is like my favorite thing to make. Anytime I can add curry to any dish, it makes me very happy.
I'll jump in next. I love big vegetable bowls, like I said earlier, grain bowls. So for me, I'll make a sweet potato with rice or quinoa, a handful of spinach, a bunch of mushrooms, tempeh, and some almonds. And I eat that probably 5 times a week. And it is so good.
Haile?
Oh, I feel like right now I'm in love with this sunflower spring roll bowl that I make, and is actually in my upcoming cookbook, Living Lively. And it's one of my favorites because it's basically a spring roll, but in a bowl. And, you know, I get frustrated with dealing with the rice wrappers. So I thought, why not just deconstruct it and do it in a bowl and make it a little easier. But it has this amazing, like, sunflower seed butter tempeh that is just so delicious and smoky and sweet. And then you've got rice noodles and carrots and bell peppers, and it's just a heavenly combination of all the wonderful flavors, and I love making that.
I'm hungry now. That sounds so good. I have to get that recipe. We just eat, you know, I think just really whatever we feel like. So, you know, if we have spaghetti, we make the meat sauce with lentils, or if we do Asian, we'll do it with tofu and lots of different types of vegetables and different kinds of rices. I love black rice. I'm really into that right now for some reason. Last night we had Mexican, and we had, we tried it for the first time. I thought it was mind blowing. It was Abbott's Meat Butcher from Abbott's Meat Butchers, which it's pea protein, so they didn't butcher anything. But it's just pea protein and loads of spices, and we put that on a big bed of lettuce and corn tortillas, and we had pinto beans and vegan sour cream and guacamole and sliced tomatoes, and it was just delicious. So we just eat everything. I mean, that's the thing. Like, it's not restrictive. It's very, very easy to kind of plant-based, you know, anything that you would just normally enjoy.
Thank you, Dotsie. So we're now going to go to some of the questions that we've been getting in from the viewers. I'll go to the first one I have here on my list. It's from Liz from New York City. Liz says that she's recently been diagnosed as lactose intolerant, and that cutting dairy hasn't been hard. Her question, though, is what food and grains can she add to supplement the calcium, vitamin D, etc., that she gets from dairy typically? Dotsie, do you want to take that?
Badly. Well, first of all, I'm glad you realized and recognized that you have lactose intolerance, because I'm sure you're already starting to feel so much better. So for forever, you know, the dairy industry has had us believe that calcium is only found in the milk from a cow, but it's found in a plethora of foods. The highest amount of calcium that you can find in the plant world, that is 60% more bioavailable than the calcium in cow's milk, which is important, is in tahini. So it's sesame seeds. So you can dip your carrots or your chips, or you can, you know, drizzle it on top of a bowl, like Merissa was talking about. That delicious tahini drizzled on top of that would be incredible. Almonds have a lot of calcium, and then all your green leafies. So bok choy and kale are top of the list. Tons and tons of calcium there. Vitamin D is from the sun. So in cow's milk, it's fortified. If you buy plant milk, it's fortified. So, you know, just, we're trying to take care of our skin too, right? So we're wearing sunscreen. But even just 30 minutes a day of direct sunlight will get you all the vitamin D that you need. And if you live in Alaska or something, you can certainly supplement with vitamin D. That's how anybody is getting their vitamin D. It's always added in or fortified in food. So you can supplement with it as well. So hopefully that helps.
Thanks, Dotsie. I'm going to go to another question. It's from Emily in Arlington, Virginia. This one's a pretty heavy one. So Jillian, maybe for you to take. As someone who's plant-based and has seen the way individual choices have a ripple effect, Emily is all for breaking down the misinformation and barriers surrounding veganism. She's seen how much lobbying power animal agriculture has, and was wondering if you have any tips to encourage policy-level change that you have been promoting.
Yes, that's a great question. So when we talk about individual action, we have to take a look at legislation and what's happening in our states and in our countries. In Maryland recently, there was a bill around food purchasing, which would ultimately reduce the amount of greenhouse gas emissions in the state of Maryland by purchasing more plant-based foods. So I would encourage you to kind of take a look at what is happening in your state in terms of any sort of food purchasing program. And, you know, we can help with that too, but I think you have to start with your legislators. And also in terms of like the election coming up, you know, look at the candidates, look at people who are really, you know, talking about this climate ag connection. The Green New Deal is something to look at. So we really have to take a closer look at, you know, who is representing us and the issues that are closest to what we truly believe in, and want to make a difference that way. But if we want to talk about it at a legislative level, we really have to look at the bills that are in place or work with our legislators in order to put something in place that we can ultimately make a difference on.
Thank you, Jillian. And, you know, going back to the point we were discussing earlier that Haile brought up about how some people just can't make this choice because of systemic issues. And just to give you a sense, I mean, plant-based foods are stacked up against a completely unfair system. So the price of meat, dairy, and eggs is kept artificially low because of subsidies, which is basically your tax dollars going to prop up the meat and dairy industries. And so at a policy level, we need to create a more level playing field. And so I would also encourage people to look up how organizations like the Plant-Based Foods Association are trying to level that playing field and promote plant-based food companies and give them a fighting chance against unfair laws, for example, laws that prevent certain products being labeled as milk or butter because they don't come from an animal. So there's a lot of interesting stuff to look into there, but we have to bring about change even at the policy level if we really want to change the food system in the next few decades. Yeah.
If people want to do something right now, like the second that they hang up from watching this panel, The US dietary guidelines are currently under review. They review them every 5 years, and then they put out new guidelines for Americans for the next 5 years. So they will release new dietary guidelines for us in December. But right now is the open public commentary section where you can speak directly to the DGA and say, this is what I want to see. You just go to their website and enter your comment. There's 50,000 or so comments right now, and they're really building, and you can talk about anything you want, what's important to you. So speak up. You know, we do have a voice, and you can do that today.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, Dotsie. That's amazing. Going to go to the next question. It's from Chris Chamberlain from Minneapolis, I think. Hi, Chris. What do the panelists feel is the top priority or topic area where the environmental movement and the vegan movement can better collaborate to accelerate climate solutions? Great question. Who wants to take that?
I can jump in. So I think a big issue that a lot of people see when they look at the vegan animal rights movement is that it's intense and it's aggressive. And if you talk to me, you'll know that I'm very forthcoming with what I believe in statistics, and I believe in total animal liberation. I think that it takes different types of activists to move different types of people. So there's not one pure form that we should all be abiding by that's going to make everybody go vegan. And I've had a lot of people say to me, well, I just don't care about animals. Okay, so then an animal rights activist is probably not going to resonate with you and getting you to change your message. It's being able to have more people talk openly about all the ground that it covers. And I also think that Haile brought up a really great point, and it's often really, it seems like it's a bit of a closed door, and it's like that world over there, those are the vegans because they can access it and it's more privileged for them. So showing that it's not this big scary thing where you really have to have a very specific life that goes with it. And then in terms of talking about climate action, I think that's just also a really great way to push the message forward, is how impactful it is. And watching documentaries and seeing it talked about on the news. And I know recently in Montana on the news, it said, here are the top 5 things that you could do in order to combat climate change. And one of them was to adopt a plant-based diet. And so incorporating that kind of scientific statements into places where it may be a little bit new is going to be really important in getting people to talk about it, because some people just don't know. Like, they don't know the extent to which, what did you say about the animal waste that fills up the empire? Like, that's a great visual. So if we can show the comparison of how many times do these animals have to go to the bathroom a day for however long they live, and look at how that's affecting your water. So social media, I'm very loud, or, you know, I'm very present on social media in terms of talking about how detrimental animal agriculture is for the planet. And so many people message me every day and they say, I just had no idea. And so the two really collide really, really well, but we need to make that more easy to understand, the extreme, so that visualization is really, really important, and showing people how the two can coexist really, really easily.
Yeah, I would definitely like to add to that. And, you know, I agree. I think it's so important to have various entry points, but I think even more so, we kind of need less activists and more just empowered humans, right? I think that it's like the work that I do, you know, you can put a certain label onto it, but it's really just being empowered by information and feeling as though there's value in the individual choices that I make and the ways that I share my journey and experiences. So I think the best way we could bridge the gap is, you know, to share about that interconnectivity of climate change and animal agriculture and our personal health, but also just be open and vulnerable with the journeys that we're having as we're learning about these things. I think so often we pressure ourselves to like be an expert, or, you know, we might not feel like we can show up in a certain way because we don't know everything and things like that. But I think that there's so much beauty and power in just the journey unfolding itself and sharing that that, and being able to commune around that, the fact that we don't know everything and we're just figuring it out, and we're exploring and we're trying new things and we're trying our best. And so I think, like, just be more open, be more human, and find ways to create environments where we can safely learn about these things without judgment and without, intimidation. I think, so much of that is prevalent in both, animal rights groups and climate activism groups. And, before going vegan, I definitely had that like stereotype of a crazy vegan, so to speak, someone who just is like super judgmental and all these things. But that doesn't exist in every every group of animal rights activists. And I think that there are extremes in every sector. And so it's just what we pay attention to and what we tap into. Those communities that are open and welcoming exist. And I think that if we just kind of break it down and take away the ego satisfaction of kind of being like, oh, I'm saving the planet or I'm saving animals, but more so just acting from that place of intention, like, this is what I'm about, I'm here to learn, I'm here to help, and let's bring in more people to join us. I think that is really where we can find a lot of power and just common ground to learn more and get involved.
Yeah, such great points, Haile. I mean, I think what you bring up is that it's a human issue more than anything else. And I think sometimes people like to put a label on who they are and then gather together with other people who all agree with exactly what they have to say and look like them and act like them. And I think sometimes as a result of that, we end up creating unnecessary divisions when we all actually fighting for the same thing. And if you break down all the labels, forget putting us into categories of animal rights activists or environmentalists. If you just, most people I find connect on a human level. If you ask them, do you care about clean air and clean water? Do you care about the future of your kids and your grandkids, your nephews and nieces? Do you want to make sure that they inherit a planet that can feed us, that has beautiful, the natural world is kept intact and that we don't drain our resources? Most people, it doesn't matter if they're activists or not, or Democrats or Republicans or anything, will agree that they want those things. Now, how do we get there? That's maybe where we all probably have differences in opinions, but at least you can start off at a point where we agree on. I think we can bring about a lot more unity and cohesion in these, what appears to be disparate movements. I'm going to jump to another quick question. This is an important one. It tends to be brought up in conversations about plant-based food in the environment, so I want to make sure we do address it. It's from Daniela Chavez. Her question is really if there's any guides that can help us choose some of the best plant-based substitutes that are good for the environment. More specifically, she brings up that almond milk, as an example, has been talked about as not being that good for the environment. So what recommendations would you have, or any guides that you can point to that can help people?
I could start. So there are several out there. Well, if you go to switchforgood.org first, there are several resources. Yes, while almond milk does put a strain on the water, it is by far a better option than cow's milk. But there are alternatives like oat, which has a less environmental impact, rice, soy. There's so many, there's so many different options now. And going to the grocery store, we're seeing so many more options of plant beverages as opposed to even dairy, which is really nice to see. But I also want to debunk a myth about some plant-based meals. We recently did a study, the climate change in the American diet, where 51% of Americans think that eating a main course that's plant-based is more expensive than a meat-based main course. That is false. That is absolutely false. It is not true. I'll go to the grocery store with anyone and show you that it's absolutely not true. And when we're talking about these things and alternatives, we have the burgers that are out, all of the plant-based burgers, for example. A plant-based burger uses 90% less greenhouse gas emissions, about 93% less water and energy as opposed to a quarter-pound beef burger. But no one is saying that a burger is a health food. So we have to take that into consideration. Just because someone says, oh, this is a plant-based, like a plant-based burger, you know, is good, it's plant-based, you don't have to worry about it. No, it doesn't have cholesterol in it, but no one's saying to eat it every day. And, you know, you'll be rid of any sort of complications that you might have. So there's a few things that we could really substitute, whether it's like black beans, you know, as protein, and a few other things. But we do have resources on Earth Day Network. Haile has a cookbook coming out in, I believe, a month or two. And Switch for Good has plenty of resources on their website as well.
Anyone else have any thoughts on that? If not, I'll move on. Nope. Okay, great. So yeah, definitely there's a lot of free online resources. I'm going to do a shameless plug. I have a book called Eat for the Planet and an Eat for the Planet cookbook, which gives you recipes as well as shows you how to use some of these plant-based products and use them at home in your home cooking, and touches upon the environmental impact of different foods. All foods have an environmental impact. Let's be clear, whether it's plant-based or animal-based. We're just talking about the fact that the majority of the world gets their calories from animal-based foods that come from factory farms that are incredibly destructive. And so if you switch to plant-based options, fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, legumes, grains, they generally use less resources and have less of an impact on the environment when it comes to emissions as well. But of course, it's a spectrum. Some foods are better than others. Some foods are healthier than others. And that's the fun. As you start eating this way, you will discover what works for you and which foods you want to choose versus the others. And hopefully we can all get healthier and make a positive impact. We're unfortunately towards the end of our time today. I feel like I could keep chatting with all of you, and I'm sure people tuned in would love more of this, and hopefully we can do it again soon. I'll just like to close out with one quick thought for everyone who's watching this, and for everyone, especially those that ask questions, and for those who asked questions and I couldn't get to them, I apologize. And hopefully, as I said, we will get a chance to do this again in the future. But let's keep in mind that maybe, you know, as individuals, we may not have the power to change how our governments function. We may not even have the power to decide how big corporations spend their money. But we do have the power 3 or more times a day to choose more environmentally friendly foods when we sit down to eat. More specifically, we have the power to choose plants. So I just like to leave you with this thought: use your power. Stop complaining, use your power. Thank you, everyone.